thank you very much, Alf. It's great to be here. I went to grad school at one of the two great universities that are within 50 miles of here, it's great to be back up here. And this is an awesome film festival. I think this is the first of many Palo Alto film festivals, and it's a thrill to be part of the very first one here. And as Alf said, the title of my talk is Achieving Photoreal Digital Actors, and this is something that our research group at the University of Southern California's Institute for Creative Technologies has been doing some research related to, and occasionally collaborations with amazing folks in the visual effects industry to try to push this along a little bit, because I think eventually, I mean already to some extent, but eventually the idea of digital actors, just like we have digital editing and digital sets, is going to have a very big impact on the kind of creative results you can get in the filmmaking process. And it's been a very interesting decade to be working in the area of digital actors in motion pictures. It's basically over the last 10 years that we went from not really knowing what we were doing to being just on the cusp of achieving photorealistic, believable digital actors. And these are 5 of the examples that I think tell one good version of the story of where we went. From Final Fantasy in 2001 through The Lord of the Rings with the Gollum character, the Polar Express, the big performance capture, Christmas film from Robert Zemeckis, the digital character of Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean 2, and then Robert Zemeckis trying again in Beowulf with all digital characters, including a digital Angelina Jolie. And each one of these deserves to be talked about far into the future, just like we see Edward Maybridge's images on the logo for the Palo Alto International Film Festival as being something very important in the evolution of filmmaking. All of these are part of the story as well, although some of them are more successful results than others. Essentially, the 2 really successful results that we have here in terms of filmmaking is the Gollum character in Lord of the Rings, which maybe some of you have caught Patricia Hanaway, who's one of the animators on that down at Weta, who's speaking here. And then also Pirates of the Caribbean 2, the Davy Jones character, which if you were just at John Knoll's presentation, he had a very major role in creating the realism of the Davy Jones character. Both of those were very compelling, but they were very compelling first of all, because there was a pretty successful transfer of the performance of real actors onto these digital actors, Andy Serkis and Bill Nighy, and very manually intensive efforts and some technology to try to get their performances onto the characters. But the other thing is that both of these characters are essentially like a cursed hobbit and a cursed pirate that are not really in human form anymore. And they're kind of bad guys, basically. So if they're a little creepy and unsettling, that actually kind of works with their character. So it's a good match of technology and storytelling. In these other films, they're trying to create lead characters that we need to have, an enormous amount of empathy with, because they are, really the main faces on the screens. And we've seen in most of these things in Final Fantasy, they didn't quite know how to render the translucency of skin yet, so they looked a little bit more like today's video game characters rather than human beings. And in Polar Express, the detail of the motion capture of what the dots were on Tom Hanks's face that tried to drive all these characters just wasn't detailed enough to get enough of that performance in the character. So it got a lot of reviews saying that it felt kind of horrific and like I see dead people, and that's not good for a Christmas movie. And in Beowulf also, great strides had been taken in rendering human skin. They had many more motion capture markers on the faces, but still somehow that performance wasn't making it all the way over. Somehow the faces still looked a little bit too waxy. And I think ultimately it's because they had amazing artists working on creating these digital characters, but they put too much responsibility in the hands of the artist to sculpt every single blend shape, to sculpt every single crease of the faces. And the research we've been doing in our lab, which is concurrent with a lot of these important efforts here, has been looking at trying to use ways of using digital photography to digitize real people's face, and not just their shape, but how they reflect light, to create digital characters out of real people. And we think about it, that essentially an actor on the screen is some kind of thing, if it's a digital thing, that you need to be able to render from any viewpoint, light with any illumination condition, and animate to create any performance. And we realized we can take photos of people from different viewpoints. We can take photos of people in different lighting conditions. We can take photos of people in different facial expressions. And maybe if we just shoot enough data and find the right ways to interpolate and extrapolate between it, we might be able to find some technologies that can create relatively realistic human digital characters. And more than anything, we've tried to focus on the illumination part, and that's why we started building these devices that Alf alluded to, which we call light stages. And a light stage is essentially some sort of spherical apparatus that an actor can sit in, and in a short period of time we light their face from every direction that light can come from, and we capture them from a number of different viewpoints. In this case here, some work that we did with Sony Pictures Imageworks for Spider-Man 2, they brought in 4 Aeroflex film cameras overcranked to 60 frames per second, all trained close in on Alfred Molina's face, and every 8 seconds this device, which actually only had a single row of strobe lights from the top to the bottom, was able to light him from 480 directions. This is actually a long exposure photo of this single arm rotating around in about 8 seconds, and we get 480 different lighting directions of his face, which if we play back the movie, you can see the kind of data that we're recording, try to understand how he turns incident light into the images that you can see from different directions. You can see he was also really good at staying still. I think actors are good to work with because they're often very in control of their faces, and I think they're also relatively used to lots of flashes going off in front of them, so they can put up with these kinds of things. And these images basically have everything about how his face reflects light. It has the shine off of the skin, it has the subsurface scattering, it has the way light bounces within the concavities of the face, and all of that data just kind of can go directly into computer model, which Sony Imageworks used to create this digital model, and this is back in 2003, 2004, of a digital Alfred Molina, and it could hold up in close-up just fine, actually. They added some digital hair, they put digital sunglasses, they had to come up with a way to have digital sunglasses cast shadows on this otherwise photographic data set, which they did with some ray tracing. And this digital stunt double got used in about 37 shots in the film. It's a lot of these fighting sequences with Spider-Man, anything that was deemed a little too dangerous for the real actor to go through, including one of the very first full-frame close-ups of a digital actor in a motion picture, which is the death scene of Doc Ock as he sinks into the East River. They thought it would be too dangerous to submerge the real actor in water, have him float to the bottom and tell him, oh, by the way, act dead. And the digital actor, they can just pose right there. They can sculpt the illumination because they have data of how the face reflects light, and they can do that all digitally. And that was a really great project to be a part of. It won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects that year, and Sony decided to continue using it on some of their other superhero movies. So, for example, Superman Returns, we got to scan Brandon Routh there. They actually brought 6 film cameras to shoot it. They were kind of replicating the process, so it was a little ironic that even though this is one of the early movies that was shot all digitally for the real actors, the digital actor was shot on film. And they thought originally they'd use it for, relatively far away shots like this, but they ended up using it on shots where he comes right up to camera. This is a fully digital Superman here, helping the space shuttle back into orbit. And they even used it on some shots like this, where they had actually shot the real actor on green screen with a motion control camera moving by him. And for whatever reason, there's many reasons that you might not be satisfied with what you actually shot on set. If it's green screen, it can often be that the lighting on your character wasn't the right light to make them blend into the environment that you need to stick them into. And so either that wasn't matching, or they didn't like the camera move, or they just didn't like what they got in camera of the real guy. So they had 2 choices. They could either spend probably over $100,000 to call everybody back into the studio, set the whole shot up again, or their digital stunt double was good enough to hold up in close-up. So they just posed him how the original actor was, lit him exactly the way they wanted him to be lit. They animated the camera exactly the way that they wanted to. And a lot of the shots there, I actually found out after the fact, were digital Superman fellows rather than real ones. So this was another very nice project to be part of. But both of these were a little unsatisfying because they really didn't feel like they were acting. Like Superman, they animate his face a little bit to kind of go into a bit of a grin here. This is based on his neutral expression. Doc Ock does a lot of acting, but he's far away from camera when he's screaming and contorting his face and such. I don't know if that would have looked great in close-up because they were really based on just neutral poses of the actor and then morphing them around based on motion capture or animation. In order to really get all the details of how a face can crinkle and wrinkle and deform, which is pretty interesting stuff, we realized we'd have to design a technique that doesn't use so much data, so we can really capture in just a shorter period of time and get much more natural facial expressions. So that's why we ended up studying new ways to use our more recent light stages. This is light stage 5 at this point, and it actually did have a full sphere of LED lights all around. And I tried to think of what are some more clever lighting patterns we could use that would allow us to digitize everything we need to know about somebody's face in a shorter period of time and with a lot less photographs. This is an actress named Emily O'Brien, and I'll show you imagery that was part of something called the Digital Emily Project we did just a couple years ago with a facial animation company in Santa Monica called Image Metrics. And it was a very nice collaboration because we tried to provide all the source data of what this actor's face could do, and then they found a way to animate it based on one of her performances. And the goal was to try to create the first photoreal-ish, hopefully, digital actor that can hold up in, at least medium close-up, actually saying lines of dialogue to camera. And so the imagery that we shoot in the light stage, actually, we don't have time to just go one light at a time. So in fact, we're shooting lots of light sources on at a time. We shoot one photo where all the lights are on, and it basically gives you this very diffusely lit image. And then we shoot some images where, like, the lights on one side of the stage are bright, and then it kind of gradients down to dim lights on the other side. And then we do that top to bottom and front to back. And we do some video projector patterns there, so our multiple cameras can correspond pixels one to the other very easily. That gives us the 3D base geometry. And we also do some things with some polarizing filters on the cameras that end up helping quite a bit. You'll notice this set of images here looks relatively diffuse, and this one you can see some shine to the face. If I zoom in on this image here, well, one thing you can see is we put some little dots on her face to help track her motion from one expression to another. We edit those out. But you'll notice that with all the lights, the light stage, she's about as diffusely flat lit as a person humanly could be. This is really useful if you're building a texture map for your digital character. But it's even a little bit more eerie than that. There is no shine off of her skin. There is not a single specular reflection. She's surrounded in light sources, and you look in her eyes, and you don't even see the reflections of the light sources. There's no shine off of any of the skin. And we achieved that result, which is very useful for building the digital character, by putting polarizing filters on all of the light sources at just the right angle so that the specularly reflected light, which maintains the polarization, is polarized vertically toward our camera. And we just put a horizontal polarizer on that. It cancels out all of the specular. The only light that makes it through is the light that went through multiple scattering within the skin, took on the color of the skin, and then became depolarizing and can get through that second polarizer. And very usefully, we can take that horizontal polarizer on the camera, in 1/10 of a second, flip it to vertical, and now the specular light comes back in. The shine of the skin is back, and now you can see the reflections in the eyes and that nice healthy sheen of reflection all over her skin. It's actually accentuated a little bit because this is polarized just the right way to go through, and all the rest of the light is just unpolarized, trying to make it through a polarizer. Now, if you compare these two images, we shoot this with just a Canon 5D originally camera, then we got Canon Mark IIIs to shoot it a little faster. If we shoot it on RAW mode, the numbers in your pixel values are really proportional to the amount of light that's hitting them, so you can do math on these pixel values. And if you do subtraction, taking this image, subtracting it off of this image, which also has that diffuse light, you can get an image of only the specular reflection, only the shine of her skin, just by the difference of these two photographs. And it's from the entire sphere of illumination at the same time. So I don't think a photo like this had been taken before. And again, if you're building a digital character, this is a very nice image to have for somebody's, what we'd call their spec map. And even more importantly, this is a first surface reflection off the skin. This is not light that got underneath and bounced around by a millimeter or two. This is really right off the surface. And by analyzing how those different patterns of light, concentrations at the top and the side and the front go, we can figure out which part of the light stage is reflecting in every pixel of the skin here. And from that, we can actually get a very detailed map of all the bumps and nooks and crannies of the face without all of that blurring of light that goes on underneath. So you'll see kind of the geometry that we get out of this in this video. And this is the result that we're going to try to aim toward here, and we'll show it how it comes together. So we started by shooting real video of Emily. in the morning. Then we brought her over to the light stage, and we captured her in a number of different facial expressions. She spent about 90 minutes in the stage. And we got all of these images from the different expressions and the different lighting conditions. This is the kind of geometry you could get before. If we analyze the specular reflection, we can get to this level of kind of skin pore accurate geometry. And since it only takes about 2 seconds to shoot each one of these images, sequence of images, we can get pretty natural facial expressions. And this set of facial expressions is kind of the alphabet of shapes that an actor's face can make. It's based loosely on the facial action coding system by Ekman and Friesen from the late 70s. And Imagemetrics designed this set of patterns to get as most information about her face as possible in just 33 expressions. And looking at all of them, I was really amazed at just how different the shape of the face can be from one expression to another. There's a lot of detail of emotion that shows up in these little crinkles and wrinkles that you get, that if your digital actor didn't have that, it probably wouldn't be a very compelling performance. So in addition to the geometry, we also get the texture map so we can color in the skin. And if we simulate the translucency of the skin and add the shine on, we can do renderings that look pretty realistic. And we gave all of that data over to Imagemetrics, and they created essentially this digital puppet of Emily's face. So if they pull on these digital puppet strings, it will go into shapes that are based on all of the 3D scans. Now, this is just a low-resolution preview of what we're going to see. It doesn't have all the detail added on, but this is what animators could see as they puppeteer the face. And what Imagemetrics really is their bread and butter is a facial animation technique that analyzes video of an actual actor and then drives the digital character with the performance of that actor. What they do is they shoot the original video, they single out frames every second or two where the face seems to strike key poses. They have a trained animator puppeteer the digital face into those poses, and then a computer algorithm learns the analogy between if the face looks like this, animate it like this. If the face looks like this, animate it like this. And from that, it can interpolate and extrapolate to all of the frames in between and create the rest of the performance. So it's a pretty efficient, although user-guided process, and it gets pretty good facial animation out of it. So this is the match between the original video, and this is just still the low-resolution preview of Emily's face. And to do the final result, where we're hoping it looks relatively realistic, basically we're going to take this digital face, eyes and teeth and everything, scoot it over on top of her original face, blend out the edge. We're going to light it with a record of what the light was really like in the room. We'll add the skin shading, and we'll add all those detail maps on top to give her the rest of her facial texture. And this is the result that we end up getting.
Imagemetrics is a markerless, performance-driven animation company. We specialize in high-quality facial animation for video games and films. Imagemetrics is a markerless, performance-driven animation company. We specialize in high-quality facial animation for video games and films.
We can kind of break that down. This is just the diffuse, the subsurface scattering of the skin. If we look at just the shine off of the face, it looks a little funny. There's the underlying mesh. And if you take it all away, that's the original video. And while we didn't match it 100% accurately, a lot of people who see this were willing to believe, okay, it's just, you know, video of Emily sitting there. In fact, we fooled Emily herself, so we thought that was a good thing. And that was a really exciting project to be part of with Imagemetrics. And as it turns out, contemporaneous with that, there's another project that we also worked on with Imagemetrics for a much larger effort. And it was a very special thing to be part of because it was the first time that a real important performance of a digital actor appeared in a feature film. And that movie, does anyone know what's generally regarded as the first photoreal digital actor in a feature film? Absolutely right. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, where Digital Domain created an old version of Brad Pitt who showed up in the first 52 minutes of the film, the entire head completely digital. 325 shots of a digital head. And there's still very little bad to say about the quality of the result that was achieved with that. They had to do a digital head because Brad Pitt is not yet 70 years old. And in this movie, he starts out really old, and then he gets younger. And at some point, it's just Brad Pitt and a little bit of light old age makeup. But they knew that today's sophisticated audiences can see through old age makeup. Actually, they did old age makeup on Cate Blanchett, and that didn't really work nearly as well for this. And the body was usually played by someone else, like a smaller, older fellow, and they would composite Brad Pitt's digital head on top of that character. And that actually gave a big challenge in terms of the lighting on the digital character, because there's so many cues in this real photography here on the body of where the light's coming from, what's the ambient light and the bounce. How do you get this computer rendered image, which really is just kind of pasted onto the scene to look like it was really there and not pasted on, which would throw people out of the story immediately? Well, it's very important to understand how light reflects off of this head, and it's very important to understand what the light is like in every scene that you need to composite it into. And we got to help a little bit with some of those technologies. What they did is they actually had Rick Baker's makeup studio build a maquette, a sculpture in silicone of what Brad Pitt would look like as a 70-year-old man. And one day in our lab, a black box arrived, and we opened it, and there was a head in it, which Digital Domain was asking if we could scan it in our light stage. So we gingerly put it in the middle of the light stage there. You can see this fellow. And since he doesn't move, we actually could go back to our old school techniques of shooting one light at a time with very high resolution still cameras. And we got a really awesome data set of this really awesome maquette of the old Benjamin Button. And it was accurate down to wispy hair and glass eyes and individually poked in whiskers and its own great skin texture that was sculpted. And so from this data, Digital Domain could very quickly see what this maquette would look like, not just from any single lighting direction, but from any possible lighting environment. They could render it the way it would look right here, right now, because there's technology available, which our lab helped with back in the day, of capturing omnidirectionally the full dynamic range of what light is like in any particular location or film set. And then you can use that digital data set to essentially multiply it against this data set of images of what it looks lit from all these different directions, and you can quickly generate digital images of what that sculpture would look like lit by any scene in the entire movie, because Digital Domain would shoot these high dynamic range light probes of every one of the shots. And the lighting artists, which had the very difficult task of lighting 325 shots of this character for the first half of the movie, essentially, could use that lighting reference, see what it looked like on the maquette, actually project that onto the animated digital character, and once they had that right, they could fire up the more expensive lighting algorithms that actually simulate rays of light bouncing around and going through skin and things like that, and make sure that that tied into the way that the real light went off of the real sculpture. So this is the 3D animated character. It doesn't have the hair on it yet, but you can see that through this technology, they're able to match it very accurately to the way that real light would play off of the actual maquette. And as a result, the lighting was automated enough that some of the lighting artists actually called their project The Curious Case of Pushing Buttons, instead of having to manually do everything. And they actually finished the film on time and on budget. And here's a couple of clips from it.
How old are you?
7, but I look a lot older.
God bless you.
You'll see in a second the smaller fellow who played the body. There he is. That's Peter Badalamenti there, who had the exciting job of getting his head replaced in every shot. And you'll also see an inset of where the performance is coming. Image Metrics worked on this film as well, and they provided the first pass of animation for the digital face to deliver to Digital Domain for their animators to work with to create the performance. So it'll show some of the original reference video that allowed David Fincher to have his lead actor act the entire movie, even when he's showing the digital.
Now when I look back on it, it was miraculous. There were many changes. Some you could see, some you couldn't. Hair
lighting all
started
around.
growing in all sorts of places, along with other things.
I was born with some form of disease.
What kind of disease?
I was born old.
I'm sorry.
No need to be. There's nothing wrong with old age.
So that was another really exciting film to get to have something to do with, and that also won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, I think very deservedly. There was a bit of worry that people either wouldn't recognize that it was a digital actor to begin with, and they might not recognize the achievement of visual effects. And there was also the worry that maybe people wouldn't be happy about the fact that there was a digital actor in the film, because maybe that signifies too many changes than people are ready for. The thing that's key to all of these projects is that we're not actually replacing actors. We're not replacing acting in any sense. It's still Brad Pitt. He's still acting. They just don't have to put him into makeup, and he can get the first hour of the film done in 2 weeks, whereas acting in the rest of the film, when he's sitting around waiting for lighting and waiting for sets to get redressed and things like that, and traveling from location to location, that took him 2 months. So eventually, even though these are expensive technologies now, this is going to be the cheap way to make films in the future, and it'll be only the expensive Hollywood productions that can afford to actually shoot with real actors in real locations at some point. So it was nice to work on like a big Hollywood movie like this, and for a change of pace, it would kind of be interesting to work on maybe like kind of a smaller independent feature. And the next film, we didn't really get that chance because it was Avatar. But in the movie Avatar, we actually had a chance to help out with Weta Digital's effects because there's a lot of digital characters in the film. And the thing is, they're not the ones that we know about human digital characters. So you might wonder, why are we scanning real people's faces to help create these blue creatures that inhabit Pandora, the Na'vi? And as it turns out, there's a really good reason that we had to scan real people to help Weta with some of their effects work. And that's because this is trying to use very good performance capture technology, where the real actors are wearing motion capture suits. They have a camera that records their facial performances. And it was very important that the performance of the actor map very effectively and compellingly onto the digital characters. And it was realized that if you can cast actors who look pretty much the way you want your digital actors to look, then it'll be a lot easier to map this kind of facial expression onto this character, or this kind of facial expression onto this character. So it turns out in the character of Neytiri we see here, everything from the cheekbones down is pretty much verbatim Zoe Saldana. And in fact, things like the forehead also sample liberally from some of her own facial textures and features as well. So as it turns out, they were shooting the motion capture for the film pretty close to where my institute was, so it wasn't a big deal for folks like visual effects supervisor Steve Rosenbaum to come over and bring Zoe Saldana and get her into the light stage and capture things like her diffuse map and her specular map and these high-resolution maps of surface orientation of all of her skin. And that helped Weta, their amazing digital artists, have another piece of information about the real actor as they constructed the models of the real faces. We also scanned this fellow here. This is Norm Spellman, played by Joel David Moore. This is sort of a family photo of him and his avatar. There's even a nice story point where the avatars are based on the DNA of the people who operate them. So there's actually kind of a plausible reason that they actually would resemble their human counterparts there. So it was fun scanning him. He had a very expressive face. You can see a lot of this very expressive detail that we were able to deliver over to Weta. We got to scan this guy too. Now this is Stephen Lang, and if you've seen the movie, you know he doesn't actually have an avatar. He never shows up as a blue person, but he's in a lot of stunt sequences. And so this digital data of his face and how his skin reflects light and such actually was useful for Weta in creating a digital stunt double. of Stephen Lang. And a lot of these amp suit sequences where it's going through many G-forces as it has a big fight sequence, that's actually a totally digital Stephen Lang that you'll see in there. And they'll intercut with shots of him in a kind of a motion base that is on green screen too, when it's kind of more focused on him. But once your entire scene, from your jungle to your amp suit to the reflections off the glass, are all digital, it's actually a lot easier if the guy who's inside of it is digital too, because then he can be part of that same lighting calculation and look like he was really there. We got to scan the hero of the film, Sam Worthington. He was a very patient fellow, at least at the time, even when we were trying to get the system to work again. And we got some nice data of him. And that got used in part to help create the Jake Sully character. But there's even some shots in the film where he shows up as a completely digital character that you might not have caught. This is a scene toward the end of the film, and it has two 100% digital characters. Obviously, Neytiri is computer generated, but Sam Worthington, laying down there, is 100% computer generated as well. And you might ask, given that they are paying the guy, why wouldn't they just, set him down on the ground and shoot some video of the camera going around him and then put the digital character of Neytiri in later? And they actually did shoot that as some reference, but the thing is, Neytiri in this scene comes down, leans down, and kisses him. And when she kisses him, there's a lot of shadowing and light interreflecting in between the faces, and this all happens as the camera's moving around. There's blocked specular reflections and stuff. And all that would be really hard to do just in compositing. It might look a little bit fake if it's Photoshop artists trying to paint shadows into the scene that animate with the rest of the motion of the scene. So if he can be all digital, you just fire up your great ray tracing algorithm and it calculates everything that needs to happen, and you can get a shot that looks relatively realistic. And it also was a good way of Weta showing off, hey, we can do photoreal digital characters as well. And I think in the near future we'll be seeing some more very interesting work out of that studio down in New Zealand. So it was really great to work on Avatar. There's another film which is a little bit off the beaten path that we got to work on that is sometimes referred to as the Avatar of India. This is a film starring superstar Rajnikanth and often regarded as the most beautiful woman in the world, Aishwarya Rai. We had a big Bollywood celebration at the Palo Alto Film Festival last night, so I thought this would be good to include today. And we got to scan Rajnikanth, but it was still really cool. I think it would have been fine to scan Aishwarya Rai too, so hopefully next movie. But they actually flew the guy out to our laboratory. This is the visual effects supervisor, Srinivas Mohan. This is Rajnikanth there in a little bit of makeup. And in this movie, he plays a scientist, a roboticist, and he creates robots, and he creates, and you're going to realize this is maybe not a good idea, he creates a robot in his own image that's very intelligent. And you see, so they have to do some face replication for that. And so being able to put the guy in the light stage and get a very accurate digital model of his face. Here's some of his maps and such that we captured. There's the specular off of his skin. He's in makeup as the robot. Allowed them to match a digital rendering of the head to what the real actor would look like. And that's very useful if you have to make lots and lots of robots, because wouldn't you know it, his robot ends up going a little bit out of control and self-replicating, and hilarity ensues. So they really got very good. And this is work done really around the world, but all supervised in India. And they had a very notable visual effects sequence toward the end. Some of you may have caught this going around on YouTube. It was pretty popular. I'll show just the first couple minutes of it. But there's kind of a bit of a showdown toward the end, and this is sort of how it happens. It starts where the real scientist has dressed up like his robot to try to infiltrate the army of robots and try to bring down the ringleader over there, and the ringleader is trying to figure out which one of them is the scientist trying to bring it down.
Start. Soldiers, rotate your heads.
That is just the beginning of about 10 minutes sequence there. And that's what's great about technology is as costs come down, we will see it used more and more throughout the rest of the world, and more creative ideas from unexpected places and unexpected ideas we're going to see more of. And I think that's the greatest thing that technology enables. So we've continued to do a little bit of work. We did some scans of Jeff Bridges. This is actually done through a technology licensee of USC called Lightstage LLC. And one of our former lab members, Tim Hawkins, is actually working there with the Lightstage. And these are some of those scans. Those went over to Digital Domain, and they were part of the mix of trying to help Jeff Bridges look younger for TRON Legacy. As it turns out, it's harder to make somebody look younger than it is to make somebody look older, which shouldn't be too surprising because that's generally how it goes. But a very impressive effort from them. And we're fundamentally a research lab. The fun things to talk about are some of the ways our technology has gotten used in movies, but that's actually a pretty small proportion of the time of what we actually are doing on a day-to-day basis. We're usually trying to come up with new technologies, build new equipment, publish research papers, God willing, which get accepted to the SIGGRAPH conference. And what we're ending up doing, we just built another Lightstage in our lab in Playa Vista down in LA. We call it Lightstage X, mostly because we've kind of lost count. And these are two friends of mine, visual effects supervisor Mike Fink from the Golden Compass and film director Randall Kleiser, who directed Grease back in the day, checking it out and having fun. This one can actually produce any color or any polarization and any intensity of light from any direction in the entire sphere and change conditions thousands of times per second if needed. So we can do some new tricks with that one. We actually are working on technology that allows us to capture these facial data sets, not like 2 seconds to do a scan, but actually 24 scans per second. And this is a Eurographics paper we had this year. It was a test directed by film director Alfonso Cuarón for a film that he's working on. It's just a test actress named Margarita Levieva, and she performed the role of a distressed astronaut in the middle of Lightstage LLC's Lightstage, and we had 5 high-speed cameras here filming her at a few hundred frames per second, and we actually interleaved our lighting conditions one after the other at very high frame rates. So we got all of this data at 24 frames per second. And you can see here, this is actually computer rendered. It's just the face, so there's lots of crazy things going on behind. But here we've rendered it using some digital illumination captured from a real location. And even though Alfonso Cuarón really just whipped her up into a total frenzy that I thought was going to break all of our algorithms because she's moving in between the lighting conditions we're doing, we were able to optical flow it all back together and get, I think the best at the time digital representation of an actual performance of every pixel of her performance over time. We're also interested in some ways of capturing this in sort of a head-mounted way as well. You saw those avatar actors had a camera on their head in front of them. This is actually Graham Fife himself from our laboratory wearing one of our prototypes of a new kind of head cam rig where we actually have active illumination on the end of the rig, and to reduce the weight we actually put a kind of a little curved mirror here, and the camera's actually back on the helmet to look back at him. But the result is that we can actually get a record of the 3D geometry of his face. We've actually strapped essentially a facial scanner to this helmet that he could theoretically act a role in a movie in. You can see he gives a very compelling facial, or at least nasal, performance. And then if you're trying to drive a digital character, if you know more than just what an image of it looks like, but you know the full 3D geometry of the performance, that is probably a better way to go with that. We've also built a larger light stage. This one's actually called Lightstage 6, and this is one of our friends, Clay Sparks, that's being digitized. We can digitize entire bodies. This is a laser scanner from Icon Imaging Studio we put in the middle, and those are some scans of his body. There's going to be a movie coming out early next year that makes use of a number of body scans from us. And in our laboratory, we're also not just interested in capturing things three-dimensionally, but also displaying things three-dimensionally. And we've developed some new forms of 3D display that might have some relevance to cinema at some form. This is our first prototype here, which is basically this little 45-degree mirror. We're going to spin it around really fast and project high-speed video on it from above. And once everything gets in sync, we can actually create a floating kind of hologram-like interactive image. And unlike some other forms of 3D display, it actually has solidity to it. When we're looking at one side of the head, we don't see the other side of the head ghosting through. We can actually produce any image to any direction. So this is just handheld video. It's what it actually looks like when you look at it there. And one of our sponsors saw this and saw the head and asked, well, that's really cool. Can you turn it into like one of those kind of 3D teleconferencing systems that you might see like in the Star Wars movies? They're always, Yoda's on some Wookiee planet and needs to talk to the Jedi Council, so he shows up as a hologram or something. So we thought that was actually a really good suggestion, and so we built this device here that lets a person, this is like Yoda here, and he or she can see out all the people who come to talk to their hologram. And as they look around here, and we matched all the angles so that as they move their head, they're looking in the right directions, they're getting their face scanned in 3D in real time and transmitted over there, a texture map and a depth map. It's not all that much data, really. And the result is that you can actually have a floating hologram of somebody that can talk to multiple people, no 3D glasses required, they look three-dimensional, and they can make eye contact with the people that come up to talk to them. So if she's talking to Andrew, Andrew knows that he's really being addressed, and Magnus knows that Andrew is being addressed, and it all works. And it's really a lot more compelling than a FaceTime or a Skype video. So we're hoping that we'll be able to go a little bit further with that and maybe integrate that into some motion pictures. So that is all I brought today. It is the work of an awesome number of people that I've had the honor to work with over time. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the amazing organizers here at the Palo Alto International Film Festival. And there's the website for our graphics laboratory and my website, debevec.org. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So let's open it up. We have time just for a couple questions because we're running a little behind. But if you have a question, there's a mic up there. Go ahead.
Hi. How do you record or collect data about the lighting situation in a given space?
Well, the main technology we use is called high dynamic range photography, and it's a little bit related. If you have an iPhone 4, one of the system updates added an HDR mode that when you take a photo, what it actually does is it takes a couple photos. I think it just takes two, but one's kind of underexposed, one's kind of overexposed, and it puts them together into a photo that has more dynamic range, more information from the shadows to the highlights. When you're recording lighting, a photo really is a record of light, like photography, writing with light. But usually the light sources themselves are too bright to get recorded accurately. They just kind of blow out to white, and you have no idea how bright they really were. You don't even really know what color they were, because lots of different colors will saturate to white if they're bright enough. So we started, and this is actually some work I did at Berkeley back in the 1990s, late 90s. Started shooting very bracketed exposures omnidirectionally, so that for all the different directions that light can come from, I could look in any direction and have an exposure that would get directly into that light source, or broadly all of the indirect light off of this wall and capture it accurately. So these spherical high dynamic range images are records of light, and then there are ways of doing something called image-based lighting that will use global illumination algorithms to simulate that light onto a computer-generated object. And that's actually become a very standard technique used by places like Digital Domain and ILM whenever they have to insert a digital Iron Man suit or Transformer robot or crazy creature into a scene. Often they've recorded the light on set so they can drape that light over the creature and it looks like it was really there.
I was kind of curious, like, how did you get into this? I mean, of all directions I imagine you could have gone, like, where did it begin?
Let's see. Well, I think like a lot of people in the room would say, it's like I saw Star Wars when I was young, and I thought that was really cool. And more importantly, I saw a PBS documentary of how they made Star Wars, like the year after, and I saw a lot of real people who looked like they were smart and having fun, playing with lots of gadgetry and equipment. It kind of reminded me of the equipment that I saw my dad would work on in his nuclear physics laboratory at the University of Illinois. And I thought, wow, it's like I can kind of do things like my dad does, which is what kind of every kid likes to do, but I can do something that I find really interesting with it, which is, you know, make movies like Star Wars. So I kind of just wandered into that kind of direction. I've been very lucky to have this job at the University of Southern California, where it's kind of a nice combination of academia and a great film school there and good interfaces to the Hollywood community. So it's been a very nice mix so far.
Yeah, and I guess on that too, I guess we have one more question out there, but I guess how did you bridge that gap? I mean, because from kind of a research laboratory to big Hollywood movies.
Well, the first thing that happened is for my PhD thesis at Berkeley, I made a film about virtually flying around the Berkeley Tower. And I did that by taking like 20 photos of the tower, some from the tower, some from below. It's on my website. It's called the Campanile Movie.
Coolest website ever.
Thank you. And we showed that we made a little movie about flying around virtually by projecting the photos on that. Showed at the SIGGRAPH Computer Animation Festival in '97. And one of the people in the audience was a fellow who will be speaking tomorrow. His name is John Gaeta. And he was working on a film where they had to do some crazy camera moves over some architectural scenes in the background and match it very closely to some studio photography. And they were trying to figure out how to do it, and when he saw the film, then it was going to provide a tool that they could use to help do that. So we actually ended up hiring one of my students. I consulted with him a little bit on how to take the photos when they went down to Australia, and those became the virtual backgrounds in the bullet time shots in The Matrix.
Following up on your Berkeley work, you had gone down to France and photographed or actually captured 3D data on the Rouen Cathedral and compared it with how Monet had been lighting it from different times of day and so on, right? Yeah. So I was wondering, now going in your direction, all of these years after, has any of that work informed understanding of human perception, even emotion?
Very, very much so. So another thing that was very influential for me is I did a summer internship at Interval Research Corporation on Page Mill Road in '94, and I stayed on as a consultant for a while. And I got to work with a digital media artist named Michael Neymark. Has anyone heard of Michael Neymark? He's, okay, great. Absolutely brilliant guy. He's like Edward Maybridge grade, brilliant and important. Neymark.net, Naimark.net, to look at his work. And I got to be his summer intern. So that actually inspired me to not just work on technology, but also try to make little films or try to express it artistically. And I also got to work with Golan Levin, who's a very accomplished media artist now, on photographing the Rouen Cathedral. It was Golan's idea because he saw all of these photos that Monet had painted in different lighting conditions. There's actually 28 paintings of the Rouen Cathedral at different times of year, different times of day. And for me, when I looked at all these photos, I just thought the guy was, being very interpretive, taking a lot of license with the colors that he used, or possibly using substances to see all of this stuff in the cathedral. But we came up with the idea, well, let's photograph it for real under all these times of day we can find. And we got Interval to fly us out to France in January for a couple days. And we camped out in front of the cathedral. I shot tons of images, digitized them to photo CD. And when I got back the pictures, we'd captured it in sunlight and before dawn. And we even got fog one day. It was just perfect. And I realized Monet was right. Lighting is everything. It completely changes the way that this face of this old Gothic cathedral looks, and it's got bright yellows and deep blues and deep reds. It's all there, and he just committed it to paper. And our brains are always factoring out the light, right? Because the way that the lion is lit doesn't really change whether he's going to eat you or not. So our visual system is already trying to take that out, but it affects us subconsciously. And that's why it's such an effective storytelling medium. I finally got to see the effect of illumination there, and that's, I think, a big part of why a lot of our work since then has focused on light.